Hello and welcome to Hammock Haven Farm. I'm Kristen and today we're getting started on our cheese making series. We're going to start off today by making a Colby. It's a fairly easy cheese to start out with and always seems to turn out really nice and creamy with our goat milk. First things I've got done is getting everything sterilized here. I've got our big 10-gallon pot. My pot actually has a spout and a thermometer on it, which makes it really easy to drain the whey. I got this on Amazon. It's a brew making kettle and it works great for this. I have another pot. There's a part of this recipe where we're going to have to wash the curds, and so I'm going ahead and boiling some water in here just to get that nice and sterile as well. And then down over here I've got our thermometer, all of our tools that we're going to need, our cheesecloth, and our mold with follower, and everything's all sterilized. So if you give me a minute, we're going to get the milk in the pot here and heat it up, and we'll see you in a couple minutes. We're back. I've put 8 gallons of fresh raw goat milk into this pot. I've heated it up to 86 degrees. I usually turn off the heat underneath it when I get to about 84 degrees, and then just the residual heat in the pot will bring it up the rest of the way. Then what I've done is I've taken my mesophilic culture. Let's see if you can see this. I buy these freeze-dried, keep them in the freezer. This is an 100 culture. I've added half a teaspoon of this to the top of the milk and let it rehydrate for a little bit. Now it's time to mix that culture throughout the milk. I'm going to use my ladle with an up and down motion like this, so I'm not breaking the surface of the milk too much, to get all this culture mixed in. I'm going to do this for about 30 seconds, 30 strokes or so, and then it's time to let this ripen. And what that means is it lets the culture create acid as it starts to grow in your milk. And that's what is going to allow the milk to coagulate and actually turn into cheese when we add our rennet. So I want to get that mixed in real well. We're going to hold the temperature at 86 degrees for 45 minutes to let the cheese ripen, let the milk ripen. And usually the pot does a pretty good job just holding it on its own. It's just the volume of this milk. While I'm thinking about it, the recipe that I'm using is for 2 gallons of milk, and I'm using 8 gallons of milk here, so I just quadrupled the amount of culture and the amount of rennet that I put in this. And you can do a recipe like that any way you want to. I mean, if I had a big enough pot, I could do 16 gallons by multiplying it by 8. So that's it for now. We're going to hold on to this for 45 minutes and come back, and we're going to add our coloring and our rennet to it. Through the magic of the movies, 45 minutes has now passed to let our milk ripen here. Now it is time to add our cheese colorant, which is Annatto, and I'm getting my fingers all orange with this. And I keep it in a plastic baggie so it's not all over my refrigerator. And our rennet. So I'm going to do our Annatto first. And for this we need half a teaspoon. I'm going to add the half a teaspoon to making a mess, to cold water, about a quarter cup of cold water here. And now this is optional. This is just what gives your Colby and your cheddar and stuff the orange color. I'm going to get a full half teaspoon in there. And you'll see just how much color that makes. When we mix it into the milk, it's not going to look quite as dark, but the color stays in the curd. And so the whey will come off the normal color, but as we dry the curds out, they're going to get darker and darker. I'm going to use that same up-down motion to stir that in. And now I'm going to do our rennet. Now this recipe calls for a teaspoon of rennet for 2 gallons of milk. And that just seems a little excessive to me. Sometimes if you add too much rennet, you get kind of like a bitter taste to it. So I'm going to cut this, I'm quadrupling this recipe. So instead of doing 4 teaspoons, I'm going to do 3 teaspoons, and I think that's going to be plenty to give us a creamy texture to set our milk without giving us that, that kind of bitter taste. I'm just using the same bowl as that annatto. All right, mix that in. I need to check our recipe to see how long this is supposed to set up. Now, it would be at this point, right before we add the rennet, that if you were using pasteurized milk, that you might want to use calcium chloride to get a firmer curd. We're using my raw goat milk here, so there's no need. It sets up really nicely. And as you stir this in, you can actually start to feel the milk just coagulate a little bit and start to get thicker. So when I start to feel that, that's when I usually stop stirring. I'm going to put the lid back on this, and it needs to rest set for an hour. So I'm going to set a timer for an hour. This is going to start to coagulate before the hour is up, but we want it to get a nice firm set to keep as much of this moisture in the curd as we can. Colby's a nice, smooth, creamy cheese. So we're just going to leave this undisturbed. If you stir it, break it up, you're going to be breaking up your curd. So just think of it as bread rising and don't touch it. It's been another hour now and we're ready to cut the curd. I want to show you what this looks like. You'll see that there's a thin layer of whey on the top of the curd. If I take my knife, you see there's some cracks in it right there. If I take my knife and lift a chunk up, it fills back up with whey. It's starting to pull away from the edges a little bit. This curd is ready to cut. So first what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and I'm going to do a 1/2 inch cut in both directions, a vertical cut. And I'm going to go slowly and try to get these as evenly as possible. Okay, now we're going to do the next cut by using our ladle to cut horizontally down. This is a more difficult cut to do. You just kind of have to guess and go down by 1/2 inch each time. It gets more difficult when you get to the bottom of the pan. You can use your knife in these parts to just kind of pull up the big pieces on the bottom and get them cut. What I'm going to do now is let this sit for 5 minutes, and I'm going to come back and go through with my knife and make sure that I've got everything cut into nice 1/2 inch squares. Now I'm going to sort through very gently on these curds. You've got to be very gentle with them when they're big like this so you don't break them up. And I'm going to go make sure that I've got everything cut to a 1/2 inch. I'll probably take about 5 minutes and go through this, and then it's time to go on to our next step. Okay, this next stage, we've got to let this get up to 100 degrees. I'm going to turn the heat on the stove, and I think it doesn't say how long to take to get it up to 100 degrees, but it should take probably around 20 minutes or so. We want to go slowly. I'm going to turn the heat on. We're at 86 still, and I'm going to continue to stir gently during this time and to break up any more of the big curds so that everything's a uniform size. This is where we get the fun part, which is like stirring for hours on end, it seems like. So it's a good time to catch up on Netflix and your audiobooks, which is what I'm going to be doing while I'm stirring. We're up to about 95 degrees now, and you can see that these curds are starting to shrink. They're starting to get more yellow colored because of that annatto concentrating. I've got them cut more uniformly now. They're starting to clump together a little bit on the bottom. We want to make sure that they're not doing that and break that apart. Partly is that stuff I didn't get cut real well on the bottom. So we're going to continue to do this. Again, I'm going to stop the heat a couple of degrees before 100 because the residual heat on the stove and in the pot is going to continue to raise the temperature, and I don't want to get it too hot. Once we get it to 100, I think we need to leave it sit there. Let me read my directions real quick. Once we get it to 100, we need to leave it there for 30 minutes, stirring every 5 minutes to keep it from clumping on the bottom. Alright, we're at 100 now. So I'm going to go ahead and stop stirring for 5 minutes. And in just a minute I'll show you how I set up my cheese press and the mold so we're ready to go when these curds are ready. It's been 30 minutes now at 100 degrees where I've been stirring every 5 minutes. And it says at this point the curds should be dried out to where there's no custardy center on them. But I'm still not quite happy with it. If you see here, this one is kind of dried out with no custardy center. But some of these are a little bigger, and if I were to take a bite of it, it's still got kind of a juicy center to the middle. There are a few juicy ones left in here, so I'm going to stir this for about another 5 minutes. And after that, we're going to go on to the next step. I've stirred this for another 5 minutes, and the curds have really firmed up a lot. They've lost their juicy center, even the bigger ones. This one's a little juicy, but these are much better. See? So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to let them sink to the bottom. I'm going to drain off the whey to the level of the curd here. And in order to do that, it's really helpful to have this pot with the spigot, because this is a lot more weight than I can easily lift up and pour off. So I'm going to attach my hose, and I've got some buckets on the ground here. This is all going to go to the pigs. And I'm going to get my ladle, and I'm going to put it down here and try to get these curds out of the way. I don't want to be draining the curds off. So I'm trying to move the curds out of the way. Not the whey, W-H-E-Y, but whey, W-A-Y. There we go. And I got this over the spot where the spigot comes in. So now I'm going to open the valve here and start draining this off down to the level of our curd. Alright, now we're at the level of the curds here. You can see them starting to show right here at the top. I'm going to move my buckets out of the way. This is going to go up to the pig pen. The next step is to add the cool water. Remember, we cleaned that other pot for the cool water. And we want to add the cool water slowly to this to bring the temperature down to 80 degrees. So this is just cool tap water. And I'm just going to add a little bit and then stir it. And then keep doing that. Let me look at my recipe. I think there's probably a time frame that they want you to accomplish this. Now just kind of do it slowly until it's down to 80 and then keep it there for 20 minutes. This is called washing the curds, and what it does is it reduces the acidity, and cooling this down is also going to slow down the activity of the culture, which is also going to serve to reduce the acidity and give us a nice sweet cheese. So we're down to 97. 80. We made it. With the help of ice. Ice, baby. I've drained the whey off of this again, and now it's time to transfer this into a cheesecloth lined colander, all these curds. And I have so many, trying to get a good view here. I have so many, we're going to have to do this into a couple colanders, and they need to drain in these colanders for 20 minutes. Then we're going to put it back into the pot and salt it. You can see how orange the curds have gotten now that annatto has had a chance to really concentrate in the curd. When you do this, it's important to keep your cheesecloth inside the bowl If you have your cheesecloth hanging outside the bowl, it's going to drip all over your counters and make a big old mess. And drain for 20 minutes. We're almost done. Thank you for sticking with me. It is now 5:30. I poured myself a glass of wine because it's 5 o'clock here, not just somewhere. We've been at this since about noon. Cheese making is a labor of love. I'm going to take these curds, now that they've drained for 20 minutes, and dump them back into our pot for salting. Now I do this with my hands. This calls for, well, the recipe calls for a tablespoon of salt, but remember we quadrupled this recipe, so we need 4 tablespoons of salt. I'm not going to add it all at once. I'm going to add it 2 tablespoons and then another 2 tablespoons, because the salt has a tendency to draw out the whey, and if you draw out the whey with all the salt right away, then the salt doesn't always stay in the curd the way you want it to. So I'm going to start with 2 tablespoons, and I'm just using Morton's Kosher salt here. So 2 tablespoons, and the best way to do this is to work it in with your fingers. You see our kind of clumped up, our curds kind of clumped up in the colander. So I'm just going to break it apart. Make sure your hands are clean. That's a no-brainer, huh? Alright. This is actually kind of a fun part. And these curds are delicious, by the way. It's almost a shame to press them because I just want to sit here and eat them. But I want to break all this back apart to get the salt in every bit here. Two more tablespoons. And work it in. Now we're going to get our cheese mold and we're going to line it with cheesecloth, and we're going to put all these curds in it and get this in the press. I've got my cheesecloth, and this is the cheesecloth that I boiled first, and then I use this to drain the whey off of these curds. So it is nice and wet with the whey from these curds. If it's not, it's going to start sticking, so make sure your cheesecloth has plenty of wetness and whey in it. I'm just going to load it up with our curds. Oops. Not under our curds. There we go. Oh, there we go. See if I can get this piled in a corner here. This is going to pack down as it presses, so it will all fit. Might not look like it, but it will. You can kind of knuckle down a little bit. You don't want to press too firmly because you still want this whey to have paths to escape. I want it to all fit and not to have big holes in it. This is the large cheese mold with follower from Cheesemaking.com. And this is a perfect size for making an 8-gallon cheese. I like to make bigger cheeses. I find that smaller ones don't age as well, and if you're going through all this work, I'd rather just do it once and use up a lot of milk. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to gently fold this cheesecloth over the top. I hope you can see that. And where it's fallen down the edges, I'm just going to straighten that up. So we've got a nice smooth cover on here. I'm going to grab the follower. And then I'm going to drip this across the floor over to our cheese press. If I can get this lid on here. There we go. This is going to make a big old mess. Alright. try to put this up here so we don't drip too bad. This is what I mean, I need to mop the floor after I do this. Alright, flying across. I set up my press with a piece of aluminum foil in the bottom. It's on a big cookie tray so that it catches any whey so it doesn't go dripping off my counters. But then I don't want my whole wooden press to be sitting in whey all the time, so I try to make the tails of the cheesecloth go into this, the followers in there, go into this little dish to collect the whey, which I'm going to have to empty quite often, especially in the beginning. Now you see on my press, sorry my sound is getting away, that once this press is down in, it's not going to keep the weight on it. So I usually just take another mold and I stick that in there. This mold fits nicely inside the other mold. And now it's time to put the weight on it. This calls for 20 pounds. This is about a 4-to-1 or 5-to-1 lever system here. So if I put on a 5-pound weight, it's somewhere 20 to 25 pounds of weight that I'm actually getting on my press. So let me rinse off my hands and put my weight on there. Okay, there we go. Got a weight, just a regular gym weight hanging on there. Put a timer for 20 minutes. Then we're going to come back and redress this cheese, which just basically means taking it out, flipping it over, and putting it back together with the weight back on it. That's it. See you in 20 minutes. All right, one more redressing before we leave this in the press for the night. This has you press it at 30 pounds overnight. I'm going to press it a little higher. It's a really big cheese, so I'm going to put more like 40 pounds on it. I'm going to flip this over and show you how the rind has knitted together better since the last. You see that? And it's still not quite where I want it. It should be very smooth, so I'll probably redress it just one more time before bed. It doesn't hurt to do this more often than the directions say. So let's clean her up, put her back in the press. And I'll check her again tonight before I go to bed. That's it. It is tomorrow and time to get this cheese out of the mold here. Let's unwrap this. It smells good. And there we go. One giant Colby. I'm going to put this on this rack over here. Got a bit of this mesh, plastic mesh that I put on top of the rack. I don't recommend putting it right on the rack. It can have a reaction with the metal of the rack and also leave the lines in your cheese. I'm going to leave that on the counter for a couple of days, flipping it a couple of times every day until the rind dries out enough to wax it. And we'll wax it. Thanks for watching our video.